Hello everybody. Welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why and how of newspaper reading. Today we'll be discussing the New Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper dated 31st January 2020. Topics to be discussed are displayed on the screen and timestamping for the same are given in the description box below. So let's start. This article appears on page number 9 and relates to environmental flow of river Ganga that was notified by the Central Water Commission in 2018. As highlighted in this news article, a number of hydroelectric projects in the upper reaches of Ganga have been violating the environmental flow norms prescribed for the Ganga river basin. Now, accordingly, this topic becomes important both from the perspective of mains examination and prelims examination, where a direct question on environmental flow of river Ganga may be asked. Now, the Central Water Commission has found that 4 of the 11 hydroelectric projects in the upper reaches of Ganga have been violating the environmental flow norms that was notified in October 2018. Now, it should be noted that the environmental flow norms prescribes the minimum environmental flow of river Ganga both spatially and temporally, in that it specifies the minimum flow of water at various barrages, including in the upper reaches of the river and the lower reaches of the river in both lean season and monsoon season. Now, the minimum environmental flow that has been notified by the Central Water Commission is in accordance with the Ganga River Basin Management Plan of 2015, which envisioned both uninterrupted and unpolluted water flow. The principle of uninterrupted water flow was named as Arival Dhara, and the principle of unpolluted water flow is named as Nirmal Dhara, which acts as the essential guideline for management of Ganga river basin. Now, thus, as a part of this news analysis, we'll be discussing what constitutes an environmental flow, the need for defining environmental flow and maintaining environmental flow in rivers, the importance of maintaining environmental flow in the Ganga river basin, the details of the environmental flow norms that was published by the Central Water Commission in 2018, and the challenges in maintaining the environmental flow in the Ganga river basin. So let's take up these issues one by one. Now, the environmental flow of a river constitutes the minimum level of water at various stages of the river in order for the river to perform its ecological functions. Now, for instance, as it is well known, the upper reaches of the river perform an important function of erosion and the lower reaches of the river perform an important function of deposition. Now, accordingly, the environmental flow of a river is the minimum amount of water at upper stages and lower stages in order for the river to perform the functions of erosion and deposition efficiently. Now, besides, as it is well known, rivers are the cradles of civilization in that a number of human settlements have flourished around the rivers, including the Bronze Age civilizations of Persian Gulf around Tigris and Euphrates, the Indus Valley civilization and the Chinese civilization. Now, in addition, the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment in 2003 has identified a number of ecosystem services that is provided by the river and has classified these services into supporting services, provisioning services, regulating services and cultural services. Now, the supporting services a river performs includes those services that act as the basis for all other services, in that the flow of the river defines the landscape of the riverine ecosystem. Now, as we have seen here, the river that flows into the middle course plays an important role in nutrient cycling through the processes of erosion and deposition, and as a result provides for a landscape or a habitat for a number of living beings. Now, in addition, the material or the tangible services that is provided by the river is what is called as the provisioning services, which includes both consumptive services and non-consumptive services. While the consumptive services constitutes water that is used for domestic, agriculture and industrial uses, the non-consumptive services of the river constitutes water being used for power generation, transport, navigation, etc. Now coming to the regulating services of a river, the river acts as buffer against flood, erosion and tidal surge, particularly in the estuarine ecosystem. Now, given the importance of rivers in delivering various ecosystem services, the human settlements around it have resulted in intensified use of the riverine ecosystem through change in land use, damming of the river for electricity, channelizing for irrigation purposes, etc. Now, this intensified use of the riverine ecosystem has led to radical changes in the flow of the river, severely affecting the various functions the riverine ecosystem performs. Now, as a result, the concept of environmental flow was for the first time defined in the backdrop of Brisbane Declaration in 2007, which defined environmental flow as the quantity, timing, and quality of water that is required to sustain the ecosystem services of a riverine ecosystem. Now, in addition, a global action agenda on environmental flows was declared in 2018, which advocated inclusion of environmental flows as a central element of integrated water resource management of the countries across the world. Now, given that the river performs a number of ecosystem functions and offers a number of ecosystem services, as we have seen here, the concept of environmental flow has been arrived at, which indicates the minimum quality and quantity of water flow that is required to perform the number of ecosystem services in a sustainable manner. Now, given the accelerated human intervention in the Ganga basin as a result of growing towns, industrialization, groundwater extraction, changing cropping patterns, etc., the need was felt to define an environmental flow in order for Ganga to perform its riverine ecosystem services. Now, accordingly, the Ganga River Basin Management Plan of 2015 provided for a broad framework for maintenance of environmental flow across the different stages of Ganga under the principle of Arival, which means uninterrupted flow, and Nirmal, which means unpolluted flow of river Ganga, in order for river Ganga to perform its ecosystem services sustainably. Now, accordingly, the environmental flow was defined by Ganga River Basin Management Plan as the temporal and spatial variations in the quantity and quality of water required for freshwater and estuarine systems to perform their natural ecological functions. Now, based on this definition given by Ganga River Basin Management Plan, the Central Water Commission in October 2018 notified the e-flow norms, which specifies the minimum amount of water that has to be maintained in both upper reaches and lower reaches of Ganga in order for Ganga to perform its ecosystem services. Now, accordingly, any dam or structure that is built along the course of river Ganga that leads to change in river flows for the purposes of irrigation, hydropower, etc., will have to maintain a minimum flow in line with the e-flow definition of Ganga River Basin Management Plan. Now, it is important to note that along the river Ganga, there are a number of hydropower projects which has necessitated the construction of various river diverting structures, including dams, barrages, weirs, etc. In that, there are about 784 dams, 66 barrages, and 92 weirs along the Ganga River Basin. Now, the e-flow norms requires the hydropower projects along the river Ganga to ensure a minimum amount of flow to be maintained both spatially and temporally. Now, the minimum amount of flow as prescribed by the e-flow norms at various dams and barrages include 20% of the monthly average flow between November and March, 25% during the lean season of October, April and May, and 30% of the monthly average during the months of monsoon, which is between June and September. Now, while the numbers that are specified in the e-flow norms may not be important, it is important to note that the number of hydel projects in the upper reaches of the Ganga are more compared to those in the lower reaches and hence has resulted in decrease in e-flows. And therefore, the minimum flow or the e-flow that are prescribed for the projects in the upper reaches are naturally higher than those prescribed for projects in the lower reaches. Now, in addition, e-flow norms are also a part of environment impact assessment of various hydroelectric power projects. The numbers that are specified in the e-flow norms are not important from the perspective of examination. Rather, the concepts of e-flow norms, as we have discussed here, is what you should focus on. Now, in order to understand the challenges for River Ganga to maintain an e-flow naturally, let us have a look at the condition of Ganga at various stages of its life cycle. Now, as to the challenge in maintaining the e-flow in the upper reaches of the Ganga, there are numerous hydroelectric projects that are constructed in the upper reaches, which has caused decrease in environmental flow of the river. Now, coming to the lower reaches, as a result of growing population and extremely high population density, the stream is highly polluted, threatening the maintenance of natural e-flow. Now, besides, in regions where the gradient of the river is low, the river gets relatively cleaner around Patna, but growing population and relatively lesser assimilative capacity poses a challenge to e-flow of the river. Now, besides, high pollution level near the mouth of the river severely affects the estuarine functions of the river Ganga and hence poses a challenge to the maintenance of e-flow of the river. Now, as a result, high population density of 520 per kilometer square in comparison to the national average of 320 per kilometer square, the cropping pattern dominated by water intensive crops, the pollution levels as a result of growing cities, high demand for power as a result of high population density, and finally, climate change poses a challenge to the natural maintenance of environmental flow in the Ganga river basin. Now, this question related to ecosystem services was asked in the preliminary examination of 2012. In that, the question read, the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment describes the following major categories of ecosystem services, which includes provisioning, supporting, regulating, preserving, and cultural. Which one of the following is supporting services? Now, based on a discussion, as it is clear, the answer is C, nutrient cycling and crop pollination, which is a supporting service under the ecosystem services. Now, again, I would like to reiterate that the specifications under e-flow norms of CWC may not be important. You need to focus on the concept of e-flow, the need for e-flow, and the challenges to natural maintenance of e-flow in the Ganga river basin. Now, with this, let's move to the next news. Now, this article appears on page number 4 and relates to artificial ripening of fruits. Now, the Delhi High Court has declared that the use of chemicals such as calcium carbide in order to accelerate the ripening of fruits amounts to poisoning of consumers and thus could invoke penal provisions under the IPC. Now, while the use of chemicals like calcium carbide are banned under the Prevention of Food Adulteration Act of 1954, they are increasingly being used in artificial ripening of fruits and thus the ban has not had the desired effect. Now, this topic becomes important from the perspective of a prelims examination where often questions are asked that based on chemicals that are used in some important processes. Now, on the basis of ripening behavior of fruits, the fruits are classified into what are called as climacteric fruits and non-climacteric fruits. Now, climacteric fruits are those fruits that continue to ripen even after harvest and include mango, banana, etc. On the other hand, the non-climacteric fruits are those fruits which once harvested stop to ripen. The examples include orange, watermelon, etc. Further, ripening is a process which constitutes change in composition of fruits from polysaccharide like starch to simple sugars. Now, once harvested as a result of increased rate of respiration, these climacteric fruits produce a gas called ethylene, which is said to regulate an enzyme that accelerates the conversion of starch to simple sugars. In other words, ripening. Now, alternately, under artificial ripening, calcium carbide is often used, which, when dissolved in water, produces a gas called acetylene, which also has a similar effect like ethylene and thus is said to accelerate the process of ripening. Now, while inducing a small amount of ethylene gas is allowed in order to accelerate the ripening process, use of calcium carbide is banned under the Prevention of Food Adulteration Act of 1954 as a result of the health hazards associated with calcium carbide. Now, the acetylene that is released when calcium carbide is dissolved in water is believed to affect the nervous system by reducing the oxygen supply to brain, which is in other words called as hypoxia. Now, besides, acetylene is also known to break down the organic composition of micronutrients such as vitamins. In addition, industrial grade calcium carbide usually contains traces of arsenic and phosphorus, in that arsenic poisoning leads to vomiting, diarrhea, weakness, burning sensation in chest, burning of eyes, etc. Both arsenic and phosphorus are also known to damage the mucosal tissue in the stomach and thereby disrupting the intestinal functions. Now, if this situation is intensified, it may lead to peptic ulcers. In addition, as a result of lack of oxygen supply to the brain, it could cause symptoms like headache, dizziness, memory loss, cerebral edema, low blood pressure, and finally seizure. Now, as a result, the Delhi High Court has declared the use of chemicals for artificial ripening tantamounts to poisoning and could invoke penal provisions under the IPC law. Now, this news appears on page number 14 and relates to the Brexit deal that comes into effect from today. Now, as you may recall, the Brexit deal was clinched in October 2019, which comes into effect today with UK becoming the first nation to leave the EU. Now, in the backdrop of signing of the Brexit deal, this issue was comprehensively covered in our DNS analysis of 18th October 2019 by Nagendra sir, and I suggest you to go through this video for revision. Now, in addition, I would like to highlight that there are a number of articles, including the lead article, that relates to important topics like Citizenship Amendment Act, the NRC, and the NPR process, as discussed in these two articles. And this article, which relates to the demand slump, particularly in the rural areas, as highlighted by the Consumption Expenditure Survey, and this article that relates to the novel coronavirus. Now, though the topics that are covered in these articles are important, the nature of arguments in each of these four articles are irrelevant from the perspective of examination, and it is safe to ignore these articles and the nature of arguments that are put forth in all of them. Now, based on our discussion, this question has been framed on environmental flow, in that the question reads, consider the following statement with respect to environmental flow. It is the minimum flow required to sustain the ecological services of the river, which is true. E-flow is mandatory for environment impact assessment for hydroelectric projects, which is also true, and hence the right option is C, both 1 and 2. Coming to question number 2, consider the following statement with respect to calcium carbide used in artificial ripening of fruits. It decomposes micronutrients present in the fruits, which is true. As mentioned earlier, calcium carbide releases acetylene, which decomposes micronutrients including vitamins. The second statement reads it's banned under Food Adulteration Act of 1954, which is also true, and hence the right option is C, both 1 and 2. With this, we come to the end of today's discussion. Now let's take up the question for the day. Today's question for the day reads, which of the following best explains Nishta, which is often seen in news? A. It is a capacity building program for improving quality of school education through integrated teacher training. B. It is a roadmap to reduce NPAs of NBFCs. C. It is a roadmap to ensure compliance in water quality management under Ganga Action Plan. And D. It is a digital health database to integrate health data.